Good morning, sixth grade. For today, I'm going to go through our last story that we read, Tana Ika, and go over the answers to all of the questions in the story, and then also tell you which ones are going to be on your quiz. Your quiz on a lesson in courtesy in Tana Ika will be on Wednesday. So there's going to be 5 questions from a lesson in courtesy and 5 from Tana Ika. So let's go ahead and get into the story. So we learned that in the Ka tribe, they have this tradition of the Tana Ika, where at 11 years old, they're supposed to go out and survive in the woods. So question number 1, how might grandfather's boyhood experience have affected him? So her grandfather was he was older, so he went through this at a very different time than um, Mary and her cousin. So for question number 1 here, when her grandfather went through this, he was willing to fight for his people's survival, and that was something that his tribe was going through. And he feels like it's very important to preserve the Ka culture and to honor what his ancestors fought for, so because they can still continue their tradition even at the time that this is going on. All right, so moving on to page 251, here we see Mary interacting with her teacher. And her teacher's trying to encourage her and says, look, how many other people get to compete and do the same ceremony as the boys? You're seen as an equal. You can survive this just as much as your male cousin. And she tells Mary, don't look down on your heritage. And Mary says, I have no intention of living on a reservation for the rest of my life. So number 2 asked you, what is the conflict? Well, the conflict is that Mary, our narrator, she's not really interested in her own culture. She doesn't really seem to want to embrace her Native American side. And her teacher is trying to point that out, that she should embrace it, but Mary right now in our story isn't that interested. And then moving on to number 3, she says, but I've always known that the Kaws were the originators of the women's liberation movement. So women's liberation movement is just the movement for women to get equal rights and to be treated more fairly. Question number 3 asks, how might this have influenced the kind of person Mary has become? Well, because her tribe sees women and men as equal, it probably was easier for Mary to become a strong and confident person. Because her culture values the contributions of women, it helps her to grow into a strong person. All right, so moving on to page 252. So here, the grandfather's explaining a little bit more about the tradition of the Tana Ika, and what it's like to survive. And then here we get to learn a little bit more about her cousin Roger. Basically, the grandfather's saying, if children didn't return, the mothers didn't cry because they weren't worth crying over. And Roger says, what a lot of hooey. I'd give anything to get out of it. So this is our first quiz question. Okay, number 4. How does this express the main conflict between the young characters and their grandfather? Well, it shows us that, again, Roger and Mary, the young characters, they're not interested in the traditions of their tribe. They're not interested in the things that their grandfather would like them to do. Okay, so it shows us that neither of them really, wants to do this Tana Ika. Okay, so Question number 5 is also going to be a quiz question. It says, the days were still chilly and the nights were fiercely cold. So is the cold weather an internal conflict or an external conflict? So that is going to be what we would call an external conflict, because it's something that's happening in nature outside of the character. So external means on the outside. So the cold weather is definitely an external conflict because it's a force of nature. And then question number 6, the grandfather's kind of training them and showing them different things that they could eat. And Mary basically says, I don't care how hungry I get, I am not going to be eating this grasshopper. So how might Mary's insistence affect the plot or the conflict? So Mary's stubbornness might help her find an unusual solution to her problem. So because she's so adamant that she will not be eating bugs, she might find some other way to survive this Tana Ika. Okay, which, as we all have read the story, we know that she does find a creative way to survive this. Okay, so here on page 254 is when Mary and Roger go out into the woods to complete their ceremony. Mary chooses, she wants to go on the one side of the river. And Roger says, it doesn't really matter. But to Mary, it made a lot of difference because there's a marina up the river, and this is part of her plan. So question number 7 is, what problem is Mary hoping her choice will resolve? So she chooses that side because she wants to go to the marina because there are boats there. So Mary's hoping that their boats will be at the marina and that she can live in a boat during the Tana Ika and to stay on a boat there. Okay, so then we learn, Mary's kind of observing nature a little bit. And then she goes up to the marina and goes into the little restaurant there. She orders a hamburger and a milkshake. And then we kind of learn about her plan. Because there's no boats in the marina, Mary then decides who she's going to be staying in the restaurant. So question number 8 is another quiz question. How are Mary's choices breaking the rules of the Tana Ika? Well, she's breaking the rules because she's supposed to be sleeping outside and finding her own food. Instead, she's sleeping in a restaurant and paying for her food. So she's not exactly following the rules there. Okay, so here on page 256, this is like the first night that Mary sleeps in the restaurant. So she, it's after hours, nobody's there. So she helps herself to a glass of milk and a piece of pie, and she intends to keep a list of the things that she's eaten so she could leave money. So question number 9 asks you, how might Mary's honesty affect the plot? Well, it shows us that, she doesn't want to just steal the food. She's being honest. She intends to pay for it. But the fact that she's keeping a list could be something that could make her get caught. But if she is caught and they see that she's keeping a list, then maybe they won't be as angry because she was being honest and intends to pay for the food. And then this is also when Ernie discovers her in the restaurant and they kind of become friends. And she explains, what she's doing. And question number 10 is going to be on your quiz. So she explains the ceremony to Ernie, and Ernie, looks at her and says, that's a silly thing for make a kid do. And she says, to herself, that's what I'd been thinking for months, but when Ernie said it, I became angry. So number 10 asks us, what causes the change in Mary's thinking? So Ernie just says the same thing that she's been saying all along. But now when somebody else says it, Mary gets upset and she changes her thinking because now Ernie's kind of making fun of her family's customs. And Mary feels responsible to defend them. And she's starting to realize, that's not something that I should be making fun of. It's something that's part of my heritage and part of who I am. So she's starting to appreciate a little bit more about her culture and the traditions that her family has. Okay, question number 11 asks us, what kind of man is Ernie? So she stays for the whole time at Ernie's restaurant during her Tana Ika. And Ernie basically says, I'll take your money, but I'm going to keep it. And I'm just going to hold on to it for you, he says, in case you're ever desperate for $5. So what does this show us about Ernie? It tells us that Ernie is a very honest and generous man. Okay, so now Mary goes back to her house, and she's a little concerned because she looks, pretty decent. Her feet are barely cut. She hasn't lost any weight. Her hair is combed. She looks like she's in pretty good shape. She says, they'll be so happy to see me. Hopefully they won't ask me too many questions. So what is she worried about? Well, she's worried that her family's going to kind of look at her and realize, like, wait a minute, I don't think you've spent the last week or so in the woods surviving. So she's afraid she's going to get caught. And, compared to her cousin Roger, it looks like he obviously has survived and been in the woods. He's been crying, he's lost weight, his feet are all cut up and bloody. So definitely Roger has had a much rougher ceremony than she has. So question number 13 is going to be our last quiz question. How have Mary's choices throughout the story led her to a greater understanding? So her grandfather asks her, tell us about your Tana Ika, and she tells them everything. She's honest. She tells them that she borrowed the $5, that she stayed at Ernie's restaurant, and the grandfather says, well, that's not what I trained you for. And she still tells the grandfather, but I learned that the Tana Ika is important. And, I think her choice to stay at the restaurant has really led her to a better appreciation, because now her, having to explain the tradition to Ernie and seeing his reaction, I think she kind of realized, that she wants to appreciate her people's traditions more. And she also wants her grandfather to see, and she's learned that just because that's how the tradition used to be, doesn't necessarily mean that's how the tradition has to be now. That as society has changed and the world has changed, she just found a more creative way of surviving it. She still did what she was supposed to do. She survived out on her own, but she did it in a different way. So I think that's really kind of helped her understand it a little bit more. And then I think that's also why her grandfather didn't get so upset about it. I think he realized that she sort of outsmarted everyone and found a more clever way to complete the tradition. So those are the questions that will be on your quiz. Okay, so we have question number 13. Question number 10. Question number 8. Question number 5. And question number 4. Those are your 5 quiz questions. And I'll also put those into a PDF as well, so you guys will have that to look at when you take your quiz. So quiz will be on Wednesday, 5 from a lesson in courtesy and 5 questions from Tana Ika. Okay? If you guys have any questions, let me know. And I hope everybody is doing well.